get started. I'm now recording this so that we can put this up on our YouTube page. I know we've got a lot of SHIFCO members here and a couple of guests, but I'm really delighted that you're here. My purpose is to inspire potential. And about 12 years ago, I had this purposeful awakening and I sold a very successful business. It was about a $7 million a year business that I'd built from scratch. And I was financially free, but I was miserable. My soul was dying. And so I had this brilliant idea to create this purposeful Shark Tank. Was the idea. It's now called Share on Purpose. And it was way harder than what I thought it would be. I lost a boatload of money investing in purposeful ideas, and I made more mistakes than I could ever imagine. But that, we ended up with something pretty amazing. So what we have today in Share on Purpose is a cultivator. So we start concepts. SHIFCO is one of those concepts. And then we have a speculator fund that we invest in purpose-driven businesses as well now, with all of the hard lessons from the past. What I uncovered in the cultivator was this process for how do you consistently grow purpose-driven businesses. And it's called the Conscious Business Growth Platform. And we've got a business process patent pending on this process. It's a very thick book with a lot of instruction and a lot of guidance on how do you do that. And then over the course of the last 12 years, we now have 5 different concepts, with SHIFCO being the 5th. There's a couple of more that are in the cultivator, but 5 concepts up, all at different stages, but a multi-million-dollar portfolio of companies that are all purpose-driven. And what's unique about the methodology is that we really bring together one of the biggest lessons is that your business grows as a conscious business as you evolve as a leader. And that was very eye-opening because I'd been a serial entrepreneur and I'd never seen that before. I mean, I certainly got better as an entrepreneur, but it wasn't really about my evolution as a conscious leader. And what I saw investing in and losing a lot of money in those early years is that consciousness and conscious leadership really does matter. So one of the things that is infused in the Conscious Business Growth Platform is personal evolution and leadership evolution. So it's interspersed into everything that we do. And the reason why I wanted to bring this session today to you is when I started this, I didn't know about B Corp, and I was just learning about conscious capitalism at the time, and really didn't realize that this whole world really exists. I thought it was the only one in the world who saw the need for what I would call a more soulful business and a business that really takes all of the stakeholders into consideration and not just the making of the money. So when we filed SHIFCO, we created it as a public benefit corporation. When we complete our first year, we'll be going through the certification process to get the B Corp certification. And as part of that, the B Corp, We the Change group was kind enough to let me hang out with them while we're going through that process. And I got to know some of the leaders in the organization, and I've been blown away. The We the Change aspect of the B Corp team is probably the most authentic group of leaders that I've seen in this space, dedicated to systemic change and really changing the way business is done and collaborating. So I wanted to introduce our guest, her company is called Cultivating Capital, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about what she does, but her business is a certified green business and a certified B Corp. And what she does is educate people and help them navigate the transition between what a benefit corporation is to what a certified B Corp is. So Carolina, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to give you the controls, and I want you to take it away. So here we go. You can grab it and have at it.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction, Terry. I really appreciate it. And it's nice to be here with everyone. I saw in the chat that somebody's here from Paris. So I have no idea what time it is over there, but thank you so much for making the effort to be here. And the same thing for everyone else who's on this call. As Terry mentioned, one of the things that I do is try to spread the word about B Corps. It is still something that is pretty new to people. So what I'm hoping to do today is to share a little bit about stakeholder capitalism with you, kind of how that is different from our traditional form of capitalism, which is focused on shareholders. And then I'll be spending most of the time talking about B Corps so that hopefully by the time we're done, you can walk away with a really good understanding of what B Corps are, what the certification is all about. And then we will have a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. So feel free to drop things into the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on it as I go. But if you do have questions that I don't get to as I'm going through the slides here, then do be aware that there will be time for Q&A at the end. So I'd like to start just by telling you about my particular B Corp journey, because I actually learned about B Corps more than 10 years ago. I was working in the nonprofit sector, decided to go back to school to focus on sustainable business. And while I was in grad school, I ended up learning about B Corps, and I was really attracted to what they were doing for two reasons. One, there's a clear set of standards, and two, there was legal accountability. And I'll be talking more about those. But that's when I learned about it. I told my boss at the time, this was before I started my own business, which I started it in 2010. I said, hey, we should do this. He gave me the green light, so was able to help them get certified. And when I started Cultivating Capital, there was no doubt in my mind that it was going to be a B Corp. So since then, I've been very involved with the community. I've been involved with the local B Corps. I've been involved with the B Corp Women CEOs group. That's the We the Change movement that Terry mentioned, and I dropped that link into the chat. And most recently, I've been selected to participate in a program that BLab is doing to basically train people outside of the organization to help to evaluate and verify that companies are meeting the performance standards. So I've basically been immersed in this community for more than a decade, and I'm happy to be here to share some of this information with you. In terms of stakeholder capitalism, it's really a significant shift. Somebody mentioned during the intros about their father, I believe it was, wanting to make investments. And traditionally, we have been focused on shareholders, and those are the people that have driven our capitalist system. But now we're shifting to focusing on stakeholders, and B Corps are really committed to a shared and durable prosperity for all. And what that entails is really not doing away with capitalism. We are a movement that is about for-profit businesses, but it does require that we rethink how capitalism functions. So under the old model, shareholder capitalism, the focus was really on how do you maximize shareholder value? Basically, how do you help make profits for your shareholders? And that was what all of the business decisions were, and really still continue to be based on. That's why Wall Street has to share quarterly earnings on a regular basis, because everybody wants to know how are shareholders profiting from what a company is doing. But we would argue within the movement that it's time to take a different perspective and to look at not just who owns shares in a company, but who has a stake in how that company operates. And so that means who is being affected by a company's practices. And when you start to look at it in a more comprehensive, holistic way, you start to recognize that there are a lot of groups that are affected by what the company is doing, even though they don't own shares. So for example, employees, customers, the supply chain, suppliers, people who work in the factories of the companies that are within the supply chain, members of the local community, other members of society. You could really expand that view, and then the focus becomes not just how do you make money for this one select group, the shareholders, possibly at the expense of these other groups, but how do you really create value for the organization in such a way that it's going to actually benefit all of these stakeholder groups. So it is still a fairly new concept, but we are also, just still early in the 21st century, and we still have, a lot ahead of us. So this is also another way of thinking about this in terms of the shift from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism is really kind of looking at the evolution of focusing on products versus focusing on companies. Because once you start looking at how is a company affecting all stakeholders, then of course, the natural question becomes, how do you evaluate that? How do you assess a company's impacts on all stakeholders? So this means that we can't just look at product level certifications. Those are important and there's a role for them, but we can take a broader perspective and really look at how is a company as a whole functioning. And that's what B Corp certification is. It is a company level certification. And this is where BLab comes in. So BLab is the nonprofit that started the B Corp certification. They are based just outside of Philadelphia, but they're really part of a global network as well. So they have now partners in global regions around the world, in Europe, Asia, Africa, Latin America. There's a very active group of B Corps. So this is something that has now emerged from having begun with this nonprofit to really being a global movement. And really what certified B Corps do is they actually meet a verified higher level of social and environmental performance. And in the course of doing that, there's a great deal of transparency involved. So I'll talk a little bit more about the B Corp certification and what goes into it, but it's important to understand that verified is the key word here. This is not an aspirational certification or commitment that companies are making saying, we want to do this in the future. This is actually going through a very rigorous verification process in order to get this certification. I mentioned at the beginning that I was drawn to B Corps because they did have this clear set of standards and also because there is a legal requirement. So it's important to understand that these are two separate but related concepts. One is a certified B Corps that is meeting this independent set of standards. That's a part that I help companies with. The other part is actually setting up your legal entity as a benefit corporation. Excuse me. And this is what Terry said that SHIPCO has already committed to. So SHIPCO has already incorporated not as a C Corp, not as an S Corp, but as a public benefit corporation. So the way that they become very connected is that when you become a B Corp, you also commit to ensuring that your legal documents embed this commitment to stakeholders. So if you're a C Corp or an S Corp, that means you become a benefit corporation. There's a few nuances and differences if you're set up like as an LLC or an LLP, and depending on what state you're in. And if anybody has questions about that, I'm happy to field those afterwards. But the important thing that I want you to take away right now is that the certification is separate but related to the legal status. And It's worth noting that the legal status actually did not exist until BLab started working with numbers of other stakeholders and partners to actually go state by state to have this legislation passed. And it's been passed now in 34 states, red states, blue states, with bipartisan support. And just to give you an idea of who some companies are that are certified B Corps, there's definitely a few here that we can that you probably recognize. I'm not sure offhand if it's been passed in Texas, but if you remind me during the Q&A, we can actually find out, because there actually is a tool that's very easy to use that we can utilize for that. We have right now, as of today, there's 3,720 B Corps, and in 74 countries around the world. So it started here in the US, but it's really taken off around the world and across a broad range of industries, with that one commitment, basically to create a shared and durable prosperity for all to be able to have an economy that is regenerative, that is inclusive. And just to give you a taste of what this looks like, these are some companies that recently certified. So you can go to bcorporation.net, look at the directory. Again, it's transparent. You can see all the B Corps listed there. You can actually see their scores of how they did. And here you can see there's companies in Australia, New York, the Netherlands, the UK, Serbia, China, Missouri. It's really taken off, which is incredible to see. So I want to address a few common questions. Who can certify any for-profit company of any size? You can be a solopreneur, as I am. I work with contractors, but I don't have employees. Or you could be a publicly traded multinational like Danone, or anything in between. Any number of industries, geographies, any type of legal structure. You can be a sole proprietor, LLC. The key, and Terry mentioned this, is you do have to be in operation for 1 year. There is a special designation called pending B Corps for startups. But in order to get certified, because BLab is looking at what you've done, not what you intend to do, you actually have to have a year of operations under your belt. So that is one of the requirements. People often wonder, why does a company certify? And, there's a lot of reasons, many of which you can see here. I just want to call your attention to a couple of them. Differentiating from pretenders. This is something that really can make a difference, especially as the certification gained more attention and awareness. It's really making it clear what companies are committing to these higher standards and having that verified by a third party versus, companies that are making those commitments, and maybe they're doing it and maybe they're not, but it's important for consumers to have a way to know that. And even if you're not a B2C company, even within B2B services, a lot of companies are looking to make sure that the people that they hire, whether they're coaches or attorneys, are also aligned with what they're trying to do through their business. The other one I want to kind of call your attention to is attracting and engaging talent. There's a lot of data that shows that, especially among millennials, there is a great desire to make sure that they can work for companies that they feel good about. And I was on a panel once. There were 4 of us, myself as a solopreneur, a couple of small businesses, and then a representative from Athleta, which is a subsidiary of the Gap. They're a certified B Corp. We were asked one of the benefits that our businesses had realized after certification, and to a person, this is what we said. So even in the case of a small business like mine, my contractors and employee and interns actually come to me because they are attracted to the mission of the work that we're doing. So there's a lot of different reasons why people certify. This last one, raising capital, is another one. A lot of investors now are looking to invest in companies that are aligned with their values, with companies that can generate a profit while also having a broader purpose. So that is something that, there used to be this idea a few years ago that if you were a B Corp, you might not be able to attract capital. It's not the case anymore. There's been numerous instances of VC investment in B Corps. So to start getting into some of the details of how a company actually gets certified, they have to meet the performance standards. And so that is a verified score of 80 on the impact assessment, which we'll take a closer look at. But it is an online tool that helps a company to evaluate its impacts across a wide range of areas. They have to meet the legal requirement, which we discussed, and then they have to sign a declaration of interdependence, recognizing that all of us, all of our businesses are interdependent. And then, there are some certification fees that do need to be paid. This is what the certification process looks like. You complete the impact assessment, submit it to BLab, make sure, go through a verification process. That can take a long time. And right now there's so much global interest in B Corps that there's actually about a 5-month wait period to actually have your assessment get reviewed by BLab. You have to meet the legal requirement and then pay those fees. And yes, I'm happy to share the slides afterwards. So I mentioned the impact assessment, and what you can see here are the 5 areas that it looks at. So governance, workers, community, environment, and customers. So in terms of, where does sustainability meet social impact? Within the impact assessment, it's actually looking not just at sustainability practices, but at those social practices. That's really what makes it such a comprehensive certification. And in fact, I like to share this quote with you because this is from Rose Marcario. She's a former CEO of Patagonia. And, Patagonia is a company that is very active, very focused on positive impact in a number of different ways. They've done incredible work throughout their supply chain. They're a certified B Corp. They're also a benefit corporation. And this quote from her, I find it rather striking because she's saying, they have to go through other assessments, other audits of their practices, but the impact assessment is the one that gives them the most comprehensive view of their impacts across all stakeholders. So the other thing that is good to know about the impact assessment is that this is a free tool. Anybody can go and start the impact assessment today. You don't pay any fees to BLab for using the impact assessment as a management tool. There's only fees involved if you go through to actually get certified. Now, I'd like to give you a taste of what some of the questions are that come up on the impact assessment. And I want to preface this by saying that it is, there's nothing on the impact assessment as of now that is absolutely required to do. So the way that it's set up is it's a positive assessment. You go through, you answer the questions, and based upon your positive practices, you start to accumulate points. And that's how you get to that score of 80. So in the governance section, some of the questions look at, does your mission statement actually have a clear statement about what your positive purpose or your positive impact is going to be, either on the environmental or the social side? What are you doing to engage stakeholders? What's your governance structure like? Even as solopreneurs, there's plenty of companies that have advisory boards, for example. Certainly for established corporations, they will often have a board of directors, but then there's questions about, is the board of directors actually evaluating the social and environmental performance? There's questions around training around social and environmental activity that's offered to employees. And then to what extent is that incorporated in performance reviews? And then the legal commitment, which again, we've already talked about a little bit. In the workers section, this is where people report on what they're doing with their employees. So certainly, is a company paying living wages, not meeting the federal minimum wage, but are they actually paying a living wage? Are there any employee ownership options? What type of healthcare benefits are being offered? What type of professional development opportunities are offered to employees? And how are employee reviews managed? Are they being done on a regular basis? Are employees provided with written guidance on career development? So again, this is just a highlight of some of the questions that come up. In the community section, here is where BLab starts to look at what the company's doing in terms of charitable giving and community service, looking at diversity among employees, but also among suppliers, because here's where you also start getting into supply chain. So what is a company doing to actually screen and evaluate its suppliers? For many companies, that's going to be a huge area of impact. And so the BIA asks some very specific questions around that. And then banking. So who is a company banking with? Are they banking with a local institution, a credit union, a B Corp bank, or are they banking with, a big bank on Wall Street? Again, not that that's bad or that you're going to lose points, but you're going to get credit if you are banking with, say a local credit union instead. And then in the environment section, this is where the environmental sustainability gets assessed. And so for companies that are selling products, then certainly this is where you start looking at what, are those products being manufactured in a way or with materials that actually either reduce toxins or conserve resources. So for example, if it's a company that is selling t-shirts, are those t-shirts made with organic materials? Evaluating the carbon footprint of a company. Is the company measuring their carbon footprint? Have they taken steps to reduce it? Are they actually tracking reductions in their carbon footprint? Have they set sustainability targets? Supply chain impacts here, the impact assessment starts looking at, how is the company actually working with suppliers to reduce their environmental footprints? What kind of source reduction is involved in the product and the packaging? And then, how is end of life waste being managed? I should mention that even for service companies, certain questions around energy usage, carbon footprint, purchase of office supplies, all of those are still going to be assessed in this section. So even if a company isn't generating a product, they still have to answer the questions in this section. And then the last section is really around customer stewardship. What is the company doing to take care of its customers? So for a service company, are they supporting purpose-driven enterprises? So a marketing consultant, are they supporting other purpose-driven companies, social enterprises, nonprofits, B Corps, or are they just supporting, traditional companies? What kind of product and service guarantees are in place to protect the customer? What kind of privacy policies are in place to protect the customers? So as you can see, it's very comprehensive. There's really not an aspect of a company's operations that is not evaluated in some form. So I'd like to touch upon a couple of questions I haven't touched upon yet, but these are, common questions that come up. People want to know, what are the fees? And those are publicly listed on the BLab website, and they are based upon a company's annual revenues. So you could actually just go to bcorporation.net, select certification, scroll down, and you'll actually see what those annual fees are for companies. They, in some cases, they end up being like less than 1% of annual revenues, just to give you a ballpark idea. How much time does it take to get certified? It can take a while. It can take, even for small businesses, at least a couple of months to complete the impact assessment. Larger companies can take, a year or longer. And then, as I mentioned, right now, due to the global interest in B Corp certification, there is a 5-month wait period before you actually begin that final verification process. It's not uncommon when I talk to new B Corps and the question of how long it took for them to get certified comes up, that they say somewhere between 1 and 2 years. Obviously, there's a number of different factors that can affect that, but it is something that can take a while. It can also be done in less time, especially for smaller, less complex companies that already have good practices in place and that have a committed CEO, really driving it. Taxes, does being a B Corp affect your taxes? This is something where the certification in and of itself doesn't necessarily affect taxes. And because benefit corporations are not recognized at the federal level, you can still be taxed as either a C Corp or an S Corp. Beyond that, I will refer you to your accountant because I'm not an accountant, but from the accountants I've spoken with, including B Corp accountants, that's the information that I've been given. What are the benefits of getting certified? We already touched upon some of them. I would say a couple of things that people don't realize at the outset is that when they get certified, there's an incredibly robust community. Because it takes so much commitment and effort to actually get certified. When a company gets certified, you immediately have a connection with, almost 4,000 B Corps around the world, not to mention, hundreds of employees, business leaders. And so having access to that community can be, I would say, both professionally and personally gratifying in many ways. And I've already mentioned that solopreneurs, can also get certified. One other benefit related particularly to solopreneurs is that a lot of people also find that it's a way of amplifying their own voice. So it's one thing for me as a solopreneur to say, hey, I believe in this, but it's another thing when you're part of 3,700 other companies that are really driving this this global movement to shift towards stakeholder capitalism. Preparing for certification. If anybody is interested in pursuing certification, the first step is start working on the impact assessment. Like I said, that is a free tool that anybody is free to use. You can then formalize practices. That's a very kind of common next step, is especially if there's things that have kind of been done, but it's never been formalized. This is a good opportunity to kind of do that. And then look at identifying improvement opportunities. So, if as you're going through the impact assessment, you see like, well, we're actually not doing this, but why aren't we doing it? We can do it. So then you can go ahead and start working on those improvements. The last thing I want to do, I'm just going to take about 5 more minutes, and then I'll, happily answer any questions that you might have. But I want to kind of give you a taste of what the community is about and what some current initiatives are that B Corps are working on. So one is the B Corp community has put anti-racism front and center. And I should mention that this actually predates the social unrest as a result of the George Floyd murder last year. The B Corp movement was looking at anti-racism. The organization was actively working on this, and there's a link on the website that has a number of resources that are available to all businesses. I will call your attention to the second bullet point here. This is actually an article that I wrote about how companies can move from words to action on systemic racism. So even if you choose not to get certified, I basically went through the impact assessment and started pulling out examples of specific practices that companies can use to follow up on any statements that they might have issued last spring. Another initiative is the B Corp Climate Collective. So this is B Corps coming together to commit to net zero emissions by 2030. And there's over 500 B Corps that have already publicly made this commitment. And there's a number of resources that are available. And again, there's a community behind this. So there is a networking site for B Corps where any certified B Corp can go and start connecting with people who are actively working on this and can actually help them bring these changes to their organizations. We the Change, this is one that's near and dear to my heart. I've been very active in the B Corp Women CEOs group, and we have a monthly webinar series that we run that has like time for networking. We have monthly meetups. Back when we could meet in person, you can see we actually met with Eileen Fisher, who's in the center there. Eileen Fisher is a certified B Corp, and she actually helped to kind of launch this group. Most recently, we were very active in Get Out the Vote effort. So we sent collectively 18,000 postcards for the general election, and then we also had a follow-up run for the runoff election. Another initiative that we have is voting every day. And so, we all know that it's important to go out and vote, every 4 years or, every 2 years with the midterms. But we also spend money every day, and every dollar that we spend is, a vote in support of a company's practices in effect. So BLab has this campaign. And one other benefit that's worth noting is all of these graphic assets, they actually develop, BLab will develop these and then share them out with all certified B Corps. So when you become a B Corp, you also get access to the marketing collateral and the assets and the campaigns that they are preparing. And the another one that's worth noting, especially when we think about stakeholder capitalism and conscious business, B Corps are definitely among the leading movements, but it's not the only movement that's out there. Conscious capitalism has been doing a lot of good work for a long time. And so Imperative, just as an example, and then there's others, Imperative 21 is basically a movement of movements, if you will. It's a coalition of different groups that are working to advance stakeholder capitalism. And BLab is very active in this. And so there's a website that they have that provides more information. But the idea is, how do we take this momentum that might be occurring individually within our respective movements and use it to drive broader change? And towards that end, the last initiative that I wanted to share with you is a relatively new one, and this is B Corp Movement Builder. So this is particularly for multinational publicly traded companies. And when the B Corp movement started, it was primarily smaller companies that got certified. And then as it has started to gain attention, it now is on the radar of a lot of multinationals. Danone is one of the largest B Corps, and there are a number of other publicly traded companies that are starting to look at B Corp certification. So BLab put together this program that is specifically designed to help to draw them in, understanding that due to the complexity of those organizations, they might not be able to, say, just go through the certification the way that a smaller company might, but they absolutely can still get certified. And this provides them with some additional support as well as they start working towards that. So ultimately, what we're really looking at within the B Corp movement is redefine what success means in business. It's not just about money at all costs, and we don't care about what happens to people or the environment. It's really how can we be the best for the world. And my own business, I am very focused on supporting people at all stages of the B Corp journey, wherever they're at. So, we do consulting, we do reviews of impact assessments, we help companies to maintain their certification, and we're launching right now the B Impact Collective, which is going to help bring together everybody who might be interested in the B Corp movement and using the impact assessment as a tool. Now, I mentioned a few different sites. So I've put together this link here, which has a lot of these resources already together on one page. So I invite you to check that out. And certainly if you have any questions, I am happy to answer them. And with that, I will thank you for listening to me talk and share this information. And I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have. And I'll start with the ones in the chat first. Is it realistic to get to 80 points without getting any points for employees? Yes, because what happens is if you don't have any employees and you indicate that when you register for the impact assessment, then you actually, that worker section is eliminated. So you actually don't even answer that because you don't have employees. And then all of the other questions get kind of like the points and the weighting will get reallocated in different ways. You're welcome.
I have a question in terms of the accountability piece of it, and this got a lot of press when it happened, but Etsy evidently was a B Corp, and then a new CEO got installed, and the board said, well, this doesn't work for us because we're going to focus on profit. This triple bottom line stuff doesn't make any sense, or we're not making enough money doing it. So how is the model maturing to mitigate those kinds of things from happening in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one thing that I didn't mention before, but that is important to know, is that the certification is valid for 3 years. And so every 3 years, the company has to basically go through the impact assessment again, go through the verification again. So that's one aspect of accountability, is that just because a company got certified 1 year doesn't mean that they're certified forever. They have to continually demonstrate compliance and meeting the performance standards. I shouldn't say compliance, but meeting the performance standards. That's one thing. The second thing that happens, like in that particular case, they're not a B Corp anymore. So when a company gets certified, if they're a C Corp or an S Corp, they need to convert to a benefit corporation within 2 years. And so if they don't do that, then they can actually lose their B Corp certification and they're no longer a certified B Corp. Another thing that happens, and this is why it's important that a company actually take that step to become a benefit corporation, because it does embed that in its legal documents, is there was a case where a company was a B Corp, is a benefit corporation. New leadership came in and basically did exactly what you just described. They were like, oh, we don't need all this social stuff. And they tried to do away with it. And it actually became the first case to basically test benefit corporation. And it ended up being settled, which from the attorney I spoke with, who's a B Corp and who was involved with that, and from others that I've heard, that actually was kind of a good test. Like, it indicated that, it was better to settle than to actually, take it to trial. But again, I'm not an attorney, but I can share resources that actually covered that article or that situation. And then the other thing is when, in terms of accountability, when a company is engaged in activities that might go against what the B Corp principles are, the public can actually raise complaints to BLab, and there is a standards advisory council that can actually go through and review that and assess, what is the best way to handle that particular company's situation. So this isn't to say that there might not be, newer mechanisms that might come up in the future. All of these might evolve. But as of right now, those are some of the mechanisms that are in place to ensure that the companies that are certified B Corps are actually acting in accordance with those values.
Great, thank you, I appreciate that.
Sure. You're welcome. Were there any other questions? Then I guess, Terry, I'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome. And I'll just wrap up with just a couple of points and answer any questions that any of the guests might have about ShiftCo. And if if somebody told you about ShiftCo, it's more than likely because their business is growing with ShiftCo. And that's what we're known for. But it's growing not for the sake of growing. It's really growing in a very conscious, very deliberate way, very much based on value rather than promotion. And that's really how we measure our success, is your business growing. Second is you'll receive support from an amazing community of leaders. All of our mentors and coaches have used the platform to grow their business. That's the only way that you can coach on our platform or be a mentor on our platform. And then collectively, we really believe we'll make a bigger impact. And we're trying to bring together some alliances, such as what you just heard today, just trying to collaborate, trying to find ways that we can work together. And all of the members of ShiftCo are very collaborative and strive to build their businesses collaboratively. As I mentioned at the beginning, ShiftCo is based on the Conscious Business Growth Platform, which is going through these different phases. And the phases really do matter. For example, as a solopreneur, you don't need to build a multi-million-dollar business to become financially free. What you've got to do is learn how to scale for impact so that the business is not consuming you. And there are ways in which you do that. And there's a whole pathway that's dedicated to that. We're going to be having a webinar in February just on that. How do you scale for impact versus growth? And then the technology behind ShiftCo, we invested, most of our investment went into the technology to make the platform really come to life. So this is what we call Shift Connect. And it's everything that we do inside of ShiftCo is really encased in this technology, including our online learning management system. So we license content from global master teachers around the world. Some well-known, we're in discussions with Mike Dooley to have some of his content on the platform. Some that are emerging leaders in their own right, but we integrate business training with leadership training and personal development. We have another webinar, I believe it's next week, on a methodology called Pure Confidence. That's amazing. And that's in the personal fuel as an example. And then the last thing I'll say in terms of the process, and then I'll take any questions and then any other questions you might have for Carolina, is the process that we use. Every member has a mentor, and the mentor has used the platform to grow their business. And the mentor is like a guidance counselor, and they help each member figure out, what do I really need to focus on? Because not every member is using the platform the same way. It's very diagnostic prescriptive. And then the mentor helps you identify which learning path is going to be the most efficient to help you master the skills that you need, the how do you get there. And then every member has at least 2 coaches. And there's a coach for your phase, and then there's a coach for the pathway that you're in. And then lastly, it's just the community. It's truly an amazing community. So if you're interested in growing with us, please let us know. And any of the, I can connect you with members that serve as buddies, and they can answer any questions that you have as well about what it's really like. Any questions for me about ShiftCo or Carolina about B Corp certification? All right, well, guys, I appreciate you joining us.